We all fear the unknown. It is a natural human instinct to be afraid of what we do not understand. Death is perhaps the greatest unknown of all. It is a mystery that has plagued humankind since the dawn of time. The thought of our own mortality can be a source of great anxiety and fear. We may worry about what will happen to us after we die. We may also fear for the well-being of our loved ones who will be left behind. For many years, I struggled with the fear of death. The idea of my own non-existence was terrifying to me. I couldn't bear the thought of leaving behind everything and everyone I loved. I would lie awake at night, my mind racing with anxious thoughts. I tried to push these thoughts away, but they always seemed to return with a vengeance. My fear of death began to consume me. It affected my work, my relationships, and my overall well-being. I knew that I needed to find a way to overcome my fear, but I didn't know where to turn. Then, something happened that changed everything. A close friend of mine was diagnosed with a terminal illness. I watched as he slowly succumbed to his disease, and I was filled with a sense of helplessness and despair. I felt the fragility of life and the inevitability of death more keenly than ever before. His passing left a gaping hole in my life and intensified my fear of death. Witnessing his suffering made me confront my own mortality in a way I had never done before. The fear that had been simmering beneath the surface now boiled over. I was forced to acknowledge the impermanence of life and the reality of death. The experience shook me to my core and left me reeling. I realized that my fear of death was preventing me from truly living. I was so afraid of the end that I was missing out on the beauty and joy of the present moment. I knew that I had to find a way to move beyond my fear, but I wasn't sure how. One day, as I was meditating, I had a profound realization. I realized that my fear of death stemmed from my attachment to my ego. I was so identified with my physical body and my personal history that I couldn't imagine existing without them. I saw that my fear was rooted in the illusion of separateness, the belief that I was a separate entity disconnected from the universe. In that moment, I experienced a shift in my perception. I felt a sense of interconnectedness with all things. I realized that I was not just a physical body, but a part of something much larger than myself. It was as if a veil had been lifted from my eyes, and I was able to see the world with new clarity. This realization was both liberating and terrifying. It was liberating because it freed me from my fear of death. It was terrifying because it challenged everything I thought I knew about myself and the world. This moment of truth led me to seek spiritual guidance. I immersed myself in the wisdom of ancient traditions, exploring different philosophies and practices. Through meditation, I started to connect with a deeper part of myself, a place of stillness and peace beyond the turbulence of my thoughts. This inner journey opened me up to a new understanding of life and death. I learned that death is not the end, but a transition, a transformation into another realm of existence. I began to see death as a natural part of life, just as birth is. The fear didn't vanish overnight, but the spiritual practices provided me with a framework to understand and accept death as an integral part of life's cycle. With this newfound understanding, my fear gradually began to subside. It was replaced by a sense of wonder and curiosity about what lay beyond the physical realm. The spiritual intervention provided me with solace and helped me navigate the complex emotions surrounding death. The more I connected with my spiritual side, the more I realized that death was not something to be feared, but something to be embraced. It was a natural part of life, and it was something that I would eventually experience myself. Instead of fearing it, I decided to embrace it. I realized that my fear was based on a limited understanding of reality, a perspective that saw life and death as separate entities. I began to view life through a different lens. Every moment became precious, an opportunity to experience the fullness of life. I started to appreciate the little things, the warmth of the sun on my skin, the laughter of loved ones, the beauty of nature. The fear of death had been a heavy weight, holding me back from fully engaging with life. Now, freed from that burden, I felt a newfound sense of lightness and joy. I was no longer afraid to truly live, to embrace the present moment without the shadow of fear looming over me. This shift in perspective brought me a profound sense of peace. I no longer worried about death because I knew that it was not the end. I had come to understand that consciousness continues beyond the physical body, and that death is merely a transition from one state of being to another. I found solace in the belief that life is an eternal journey, and that death is simply a doorway to a new adventure. The peace I found was not the absence of fear, but the transcendence of it. It was a deep knowing that I am part of something much greater than myself, a cosmic dance of creation and dissolution. I no longer felt the need to cling to life or fear its end. Instead, I could appreciate the beauty and preciousness of every moment. This newfound peace allowed me to live more fully and to appreciate the simple things in life. I was no longer afraid to be vulnerable, to love deeply, to experience the full spectrum of human emotions. My journey through grief and fear ultimately led me to a place of deep gratitude. I was grateful for the time I had been given, and I was determined to make the most of it. I learned to appreciate the preciousness of life and to live each day to the fullest. I also developed a deep sense of compassion for others who were struggling with their own mortality. The experience of confronting my fear of death had transformed me. I started to live with a heightened awareness of the interconnectedness of all things. I became more mindful of my actions and their impact on the world around me. I was filled with a desire to live a life of purpose and meaning, a life that would make a positive difference in the world. This gratitude extended to the experience of grief itself. I realized that grief, though painful, is a testament to the love we shared with those who have passed. It is a reminder of the preciousness of life and the importance of cherishing every moment. The journey from fear to enlightenment was not easy, but it was ultimately transformative. I emerged from this experience with a new understanding of myself, of life, and of death. I had faced my deepest fear and emerged stronger and more resilient. The fear of death, once a constant shadow, had become a catalyst for personal growth and spiritual awakening. I learned that death is not something to be feared, but something to be embraced. It is a natural part of life, and it is something that we will all experience at some point. By accepting death, we can free ourselves from the fear that prevents us from truly living. We can then live our lives to the fullest, appreciating each moment and making the most of the time we have been given. We can also find peace and solace in the knowledge that death is not the end, but a transition to a new and unknown adventure.